Welcome to the Archetypal Mosaic. This is Mikhail Tank. Today's guest is Sidney Campbell, Raptor Program Manager of the American Bald Eagle Foundation in Alaska. Sidney, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Can you please tell the audience a little bit about the American Bald Eagle Foundation in general?
Absolutely. So the American Bald Eagle Foundation is a natural history museum and raptor center located in Haines, Alaska. Haines is a little out-of-the-way town in southeast Alaska that's famous for our congregation of bald eagles. Every November we have one of the largest congregations of bald eagles in the world. We have a really unique little ecosystem here. And we have a late run of salmon, which arrives when food is really scarce in the rest of the area, which draws birds to the river. So we have between 2,000 and 4,000 bald eagles on the river between November and December. And that's why we are located where we are.
When people come into the museum, what can they expect, and what's the experience like?
So our Natural History Museum has over 200 specimens that are representative of Southeast Alaska's wildlife, geography, geology, and culture. So there's a lot to see in here. It's a really beautiful arrangement. And then our Raptor Center is an area where folks can meet our 10 live birds. So we do have a team of 10 ambassadors. These are birds who work to educate the public and act as representatives of their species. We have 3 bald eagles on our team, 3 big, beautiful ladies. And we also have a few owls, a few hawks, and a few falcons on our team.
Now, there's also an eagle depository, I believe in Washington, where deceased eagles and feathers go to the Native American land. Are you in any way in collaboration with them, or do you communicate with that repository?
So there is a repository. They're located in Colorado. And most facilities that house raptors in this country are in connection with that repository. So birds naturally undergo a process called molting, which is basically where the old feathers fall out and they're growing new feathers to replace them. When it comes to bald eagles, when those old feathers fall out, we are required to send them down to the repository. Once a year, we mail them all the feathers that fall off of our bald eagle ladies. And then in circumstances where we come across a bald eagle who has maybe died in the area, or if a bald eagle comes in for treatment and unfortunately dies in our care, we are required also to pass that on to the repository. And those parts are then doled out to First Nations folks who apply for a permit through the repository.
Does that include also Canada, or specifically North America, or specifically the United States?
That's specifically the United States. I'm actually not certain what happens to bald eagle feathers in Canada.
Okay, great. Now, you mentioned that you have 3 lady bald eagles, which are usually larger in size than the males, and I also heard that the largest bald eagles in the world are in Alaska with a wingspan of 8 up to 8 feet. Can you briefly describe the measurements of the female bald eagles, and also what's interesting about it is the fact that they mate for life, and sometimes in a triplet. Can you discuss that?
All right, so there's a lot of information there. So you're correct. Bald eagles in Alaska, on average, are larger than bald eagles than we find in the rest of the country. Typically, bald eagles will range between 6 and 14 pounds. And again, you're correct. Males are typically smaller than females, but there is a fair amount of overlap. That's not a hard and fast rule. You may have an Alaskan male bald eagle who's larger than a female bald eagle from maybe lower south. As far as the ladies on our team, they are pretty hefty. Bella is our smallest. She usually weighs in around 10 or 11 pounds, depending on the time of year. And then we have Arden, who's right in the middle. She usually weighs in between 11 and 12 pounds, again, depending on the time of year. And then our oldest and largest bald eagle, Vega, she just weighed in at a whopping 15 pounds, which is the heaviest I've ever seen her. So she typically ranges between around 13 and a half to, 15. She might be a little heavier than usual right now because she does lay eggs most years. So the 3 bald eagles on our team are females, and they are housed individually. Nobody shares a space anymore. But it's not uncommon for birds who live in human care to sometimes lay eggs. It's really a good indication to us that Vega feels safe and comfortable, that she's in really good health, and that she does lay eggs every year. But they are infertile, so we remove them when she's usually spent about a week on them. She usually abandons them anyway. But she's putting on a lot of weight in preparation to lay those eggs. Specifically, she's sequestering a lot of calcium in her bones, which has made her really dense. And that calcium is what's going to get used to form those eggshells.
And tell me...
Now, as far as bald eagles... Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
So as far as bald eagles mating for life, this is typically true, but out in the wild, it's all about reproductive success. So I know we like to think of wild animals as being this romantic picture of monogamy. But in cases where bald eagles are maybe not successful rearing chicks, they'll try a couple years in a row, and if it doesn't work, they may split off and find a new mate for whatever reason. They're just not genetically compatible. And in the event that a partner dies, it's not uncommon to see the remaining eagle find a new mate. But, when things are working, when they're raising babies every year, they'll absolutely keep coming back.
Now, there's a period of time when a bald eagle, between the time that they're a child and a full adult, before they get their full white head and all that stuff, they spend several years flying around and just observing things. Can you tell me about that stage of their life?
Yeah, so bald eagles are considered juveniles until they develop their white head and tail, which usually happens between 4 and 6 years of age. And during this time, they're really just figuring out how to be an eagle. It's tough to be a wild animal. You have to learn to find your food. You have to learn to find safe places to rest and to sleep. You have to learn where the resources are and when they're there. So tracking eagles is actually a really interesting thing. Several years ago, there was a paper published that tracked several bald eagles around Southeast Alaska and sort of determined whether there were any common movement strategies. And what they found is that the juveniles tend to move around quite a bit more than the adults because they just don't know where things are yet. It's a difficult time for them.
So they're really kind of in solitary school in a way, right?
Yeah, they're gaining all of that experience. It's like when you graduate from high school and you and your friends go on a road trip to just see what's out there, I guess. They're just wandering around trying to figure out where the food is and where all the safe spot is. And, I guess probably where the ladies are.
Huh. And tell me, when the female... First of all, the 3 females that you have there, the bald eagles, can they fly?
So the 3 birds on our team do have disabilities which prevent them from being released. In 2 of their cases, they're not flighted. They have amputations. Both of them actually have the same amputation, which is interesting. On their right wing, a very small amputation. It's really just the end of that wing. It's what essentially the equivalent of our hand. But it does prevent them from flying. Our 3rd bald eagle is fully flighted. Her flight isn't perfect, though. She has a shoulder disability which prevents her from really sustaining that flight. Now,
when they release the eggs, which are not fertile, in the very beginning, do they care for them as if they were a baby and then they realize it? Or how do they realize that the egg is not going to be, a baby?
That's an interesting question, and I'm not 100% certain what's happening inside their brains ever. This will be the 4th year in a row that we expect to see Vega lay some eggs. Her first year, we didn't expect it, so they actually rolled off the perch where she laid them and broke, which was a little sad for all of us. So the second year, we knew better, so we did better. We built a lip on that perch, and she did sit on them for quite a while. That year, she was also housed with Arden, another one of our females, and it was interesting to watch both females actually spend time sitting on the eggs. Arden would go up and sit on them when Vega went down to eat or maybe bathe. Arden was actually better at it than Vega was. Vega tends to sit sort of next to her eggs. But, both of them began gradually to spend less time sitting on top of them, and so when we went in to do perch maintenance about 2 weeks after she had laid them, we pulled them out, and neither of them responded adversely in any way. They just went about their regular business.
Do the female eagles ever fight with each other for either territory or food or anything else?
Well, so that's interesting. Bald eagles are, from a natural history perspective, really prone to competing and fighting. Out in the wild, these birds are scavengers. They're what's called actually scavenging kleptoparasites, which is a big fancy way of calling them pirates. These birds tend to look for food that's really easy to acquire and to fight each other for it. So here on the Chilkat, what we see a lot of times is, when salmon spawn, they die and then they wash up on the banks of the river. And that's where we see the eagles, is just finding a dead fish and defending it. A lot of times you'll see 20 bald eagles sitting and staring at the same salmon, and as soon as one of them moves for it, they'll all go fight for it. So when we did have bald eagles housed together, we did see some competition for resources. All of our birds are active participants in training. They have a trainer step in every day and ask them to do things like step on a scale or to fly to target, so they're getting some exercise. And so it was easier for us to just send 2 trainers in to work with birds individually. That's a good way to keep them, engaged in their own food. But, occasionally we would see them try to steal food from one another, which is why ultimately we decided to build new enclosures. We did a really big fundraiser a couple years ago, and we built 2 big, new, beautiful enclosures so that all 3 of our bald eagles could live by themselves.
That's wonderful. And tell me, so basically you mentioned that they're in a way considered flying parasites?
Yeah, these guys are definitely considered scavenging kleptoparasites, is the phrase that's used.
It's quite a term. Now, they're also raptors, and the term raptor, what does that really mean?
So that's a really timely question. The term raptor has never really been universally agreed upon. In the past, there have been some sort of wishy-washy characteristics that we used. Typically, we defined raptors as birds that captured and killed their prey with their feet. We looked for sharp beaks and really strong talons. And another one that people often refer to as keen eyesight, as well as being what's called obligate carnivores. Basically, raptors were considered birds who ate only meat. More recently, a paper has come out in the Journal of Raptor Research, which sort of redefines the way we look at raptors and expanded it a bit. We've always sort of agreed that eagles and hawks and falcons sure are raptors, but there was a lot of question about, are vultures raptors? Are owls raptors sometimes? So this paper looks at a common ancestor shared by raptors. Basically, millions of years ago, this raptorial land bird, raptorial meaning that they ate vertebrate prey, and from that bird we have descended all these groups of birds, and raptors are defined as those birds who are descended from this raptorial ancestor and have never lost that raptorial trait. So our new expanded definition of raptors still includes eagles and hawks and falcons, but it's been expanded to, yes, include vultures and owls, as well as a really neat group of birds from South America, the 2 species called Seriemas.
Now, how old are eagles? As you mentioned, they contain the traits. How old do people think they really are? Are they dinosaur birds or just a few thousand years?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I've never had that question, and I don't actually know the answer.
Okay. And then what about the DNA, in the sense that there are over 60 types of eagles in the world? So do they all share a type of DNA, or what would you say about that?
They do. So as you sort of follow the evolutionary ladder, I guess, all eagles, and in fact also hawks and kites and some old world vultures, belong to the group Exopitriformes. And then when you break down to just eagles, there are several different genera of eagles. So here in North America, what we have are sea eagles, which includes bald eagles. And then we have Aquila, or the true eagles. Those are golden eagles. So they're different genus, different species, but they are very closely related. Other sea eagles we have in the world include like African fish eagles. There are stellar sea eagles. In kind of Scandinavia, the northern hemisphere, they have white-tailed eagles that are very similar to bald eagles, but genetically distinct a little bit.
And then what do you think that makes eagles a sovereign symbol in so many countries, lands, time periods? What makes them so sovereign?
I really think it has to do with their appearance and their behavior. These are big birds, I mean, these are really, really big, beautiful individuals. There's really nothing like seeing them out in the wild. And behaviorally, these are strong individuals. These are really, really hardy animals who can survive a lot and can do a lot with very limited resources. I definitely think in that way they are inspiring.
And their eyes, I've heard that their eyes see basically better than us by 4 times, and they have double eyelids. What does the second eyelid do?
So eagles and other raptors have what's called a nictitating membrane. That's that other eyelid. And that's essentially there as a protective measure. This is a really common trait in a lot of other animals, but basically it's translucent, so they can still mostly see through it, but it shields their eyes from, things like debris if they're flying through the air really quickly, or in the case of maybe an osprey, they'll close that nictitating membrane when they're diving into the water to keep themselves shielded from the water, but also, sort of see where they're going.
Amazing. It's amazing. What else amazes you or inspires you about the eagles?
That's a big question. I think in general, what most impresses me about bald eagles and other raptors is their resilience. Especially bald eagles, this is such an incredible conservation story. This was an endangered species for a long time. We had a huge impact on us, on them. Our chemical use was a huge detriment to their population. We saw a really, really massive decline in a short period. But I think the resilience of that species, coupled with the really hard work of some important conservationists, resulted in what I look at as one of our greatest success stories. Bald eagles are no longer considered endangered, and they're really thriving, especially in areas like Alaska.
And that was primarily due to DDT, right? The chemical.
Correct, yeah. So DDT is a chemical that we use as an insecticide. And unfortunately, DDT, especially as it bioaccumulates in birds, it prevents them from metabolizing calcium properly. So when they laid eggs, they didn't have enough calcium to make them strong. Those shells would just crack when they sat on them.
I see. Altogether, I think people should definitely come and visit your foundation. And when they go to Alaska. Yes, the American Bald Eagle Foundation is located in Alaska. Is it pronounced Haines?
It's Haines, yeah.
Haines. Okay, it's in Haines, Alaska, and it seems like an absolutely fantastic place. And I'm just so glad that you're on the show. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience?
We really appreciate being invited to be on the show. We're always excited to talk about bald eagles and wildlife in general. We also always want to invite folks to come visit us in Haines. Alaska is just such a special place. I really feel like this is unlike any place anyone has ever seen. And if they want to see bald eagles in the wild, this is definitely the place to do it.
Sidney Campbell, thank you so much for being on the Archetypal Mosaic and sharing this information.
Thank you so much for having me.